shorter than everybody. All right, thank you for coming out tonight. This should be a good discussion. My background's education, so I do like to have some discussion. If I talk the whole time, it gets awkward for me and you guys. So feel free to ask questions, and then we'll do a live Q&A at the end also. So, like you mentioned, if you look up here, you're going to see a lot of different people from different backgrounds, and I want you to have that in mind while we move ahead to this first question. All right, first question, easy question. Do we all deserve equal treatment? Yes, right? So if we all deserve equal treatment, regardless of age, even if you're a redhead, even if you are a model and have disabilities, it means that there's probably something that's the same about us, right? So then here's my question for you guys. What is it that is the same about us? So what I want you to do is you can just turn to your neighbor, or if there's someone you think is cute, this is your excuse to talk to them, and ask them what is it that is the same about all of us. Try to come up with an answer. I'm going to give you like 1 or 2 minutes. I know you're going to have to exercise. It sucks. All right, some of you are starting to quiet down, so I'm sure you have brilliant answers. All right, is anyone willing to share their answer? What is the same about all of us? Be brave. We're all human. That's my answer. Any other answers?
We're all God's children and we're all the same in his eyes.
We are all God's children. We all look the same in his eyes. Absolutely. Anything else? Yes.
We all have to pay taxes and we all are going to die.
We all pay taxes and we're all going to die. Very true. Unless he comes back, like right now. Or later. It could happen later on. I'd be okay with either one. All right, so yes, it's our human nature, our humanness. That's the thing that we share with everybody. So then the next question that follows from that is, where does our value come from? And we just said it comes from our humanity, which is an interesting idea, because generally there's 2 main views of this when you're looking at yourself, when you're looking at kind of everybody else in the world. There's usually 2 ways of determining how you're going to view everybody. First one is what we're talking about, this idea that our value is intrinsic. It's inherent. It's who we are. No one can take it away. It's not based on anybody's whims. The other view that a lot of times you'll see in society is this kind of utilitarian idea where it's subjective, where your value is based on what you contribute to society or how you help other people or how they view you. And you guys can imagine how historically that's kind of been a dangerous way of approaching this topic. Now again, it obviously follows if we think our humanness is what makes us equal, deserving of the same sort of rights, that if the unborn are equally human, they deserve equal treatment. And that's something we're going to dive into a little bit more today. Now, did any of you guys watch Sesame Street growing up? I was all about Sesame Street. I loved Cookie Monster. It was my favorite. Still is. Does anybody remember the part where I'm not going to sing because I have a sore throat and I can't sing. But do you guys remember the part where they do the song about how one of these things is not like the other? One of these. My brother had some friends, they liked to sing about him because he was the only pasty white guy. It was pretty funny. So here's the deal. If you look up there, there's going to be one place that's a little different than the others, right? Everyone point to it. Pretend you're in kindergarten. Yay, good job. Because that one has 3 cookies. All right, we're going to have 4 scenarios, and one of them is not like the others. Okay, first one. Let's imagine on the way home from here, after listening to me, you decide you need a drink. And then you have another drink, and then another, and then you decide to do something incredibly selfish and get behind the wheel of the car. You're driving home, you hit a car with a pregnant woman, she, as well as her child or fetus, dies. Depending on the state's laws, you're probably going to be facing something like double homicide. All right, now let's say some of you take the big green limousine, the bus, on the way home, okay? And while you're on the bus, there's somebody you know or someone that you can tell is pregnant. Now, your 3rd graders thought I was pregnant last week. This is someone where you really are sure they're pregnant. Not a food baby, like really pregnant. And if you don't know, don't guess. Bad idea. I've done that. She's obviously pregnant, and you see her smoking a cigarette. My guess is even if you don't say anything, you're probably thinking something, right? And my guess is someone will probably say something, even if it's just like, oh, a nerve, something like that, right? Because it's not socially acceptable, because we know that that kind of is abuse to the child. All right, third situation. And nod your head if you've heard any stories like this, but I feel like I more and more often hear stories of guys maybe slipping medicine into their wife's food or something like that to cause her to miscarry. Have you guys heard about any of those stories? Okay. It happens. Actually, a guy who is friends with Paris Hilton did it to his girlfriend, and he's facing charges for it right now. All right, if he gets prosecuted, he's probably going to be in a lot of trouble, right? Now, let's imagine I'm pregnant. It's not a good time, and for any of a number of reasons, it could be I really, really don't like the guy who'd be the father. Maybe I'm concerned about paying for school and a baby. Maybe I just don't want my lifestyle to change. I go over to Affiliated Medical Services, who does 2,500 abortions a year, and I decide to have an abortion. Am I going to be doing anything illegal? Am I going to be doing anything that, as a society, we look down on? Depending on who you talk to, not necessarily, right? And I'm not saying that to say, oh, look, that woman, myself in this story, is a criminal. I'm saying it to say, is there some inconsistencies when it comes to this topic? Absolutely, right? In the first three scenarios, we're saying, oh, that's a child, that has value. There's consequences if you violate that child's human rights. But then in the fourth one, we're saying it's just the contents of the uterus, or a blob of tissue, or insert whatever euphemism you want. All right. And I think that double standard leads to a lot of injustice. And historically, we've seen kind of similar injustices. And usually there is one group, usually in power, who benefits from that. So historically, we have groups that have legally dehumanized others for gain. Look at slavery. Around the same time, we saw the same thing with suffrage, right? Ladies, they were so afraid that if we got the vote, that women were going to start disrespecting their husbands and quit doing laundry or whatever sexist thing they thought women did. And that just hell would break loose, and it would be the end of society as we knew it, okay? A lot of people were driven to say women were less than men to protect their power. So then when we look at our society, there's some different groups that are equally dehumanized nowadays, I don't think any more than the unborn. I love that, especially because this year I wasn't as interested in either of the teams of the Super Bowl, so I especially was interested in the commercials, so I was all about that. Now, everyone I watched the game with thought that was hilarious. Did you guys have the same experience? We all thought it was so funny. And during halftime, I hopped on my phone and I was checking some things out, and I didn't anticipate that like Twitter and Facebook would explode and everything would go crazy. What happened is there were groups like NARAL, which stands for National Abortion Reproductive Rights Action League. They've changed names 3 times. They freaked out on Twitter. This was one of their tweets, #NotBuyingIt. That Doritos ad using anti-choice tactic of humanizing fetuses and blah, 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 it goes on and on. So basically their criticism was that this commercial was humanizing a fetus. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the fetus, is it a human? Yeah, okay. And it was funny because then everyone started responding to them, like, why do you hate babies? Why do you hate joy? It was hilarious. They ended up taking down the tweet before I could like paste all the responses that were so good because I wanted to save them because they were so funny. Like one of my old bosses, I don't remember what she put, but it was brilliant. It was great. I think I might have tweeted a response too. Probably not as clever. But they freaked out when they saw this because we're not supposed to talk about them like they're babies. We're not supposed to pretend they're humans. That's really, really bad. Because then we're going to start talking about things like this, like the fact that this is a 9-week-old baby. We're not supposed to talk about the heartbeat at 21 days or the fingernails at 11 weeks or just basic things, the fact that it's a living, whole, unique, growing human being. And when you have 2 human parents, in 5th grade we learned usually their progeny are human, all right? They have unique DNA. Even if they're twins, identical, they have different fingerprints, which is super cool because that way if your twin commits a crime, you can't get caught. Your own blood type, okay? My mom's O, I'm not O. So there are kind of these inconsistencies. So let's say you're pregnant and you go in for an ultrasound. The doctor is probably going to say at some point the phrase, baby's heartbeat. Generally, even in that setting, medical professional, they're not going to say fetus heartbeat, right? They're usually not going to say that. We see other examples of this. In Korea and also in China, and obviously China is no example for human rights. They have the two-child policy now. But in those countries, they talk about the idea of our age starting before we're born. Because if we're honest, like, I was Rachel 5 minutes before I was born and 5 months before I was born. I didn't like suddenly become a different person, right? We also see examples of this even with like baby showers. You call it a baby shower, you don't say fetus shower. When you tell people they're going to be grandparents, you don't announce, oh, you're going to have a grand fetus. That's just weird, right? Now, that doesn't mean I'm against the word fetus. I use it interchangeably with baby and child. Fetus is just a developmental term, like toddler or teenager or senior citizen, I think. But it's kind of turned into this kind of vague, cold word. So a lot of times people don't want to use it for that reason. All right, so this is kind of like Family Feud. I was trying to come up with some different things that people use to base value or humanity off of it, or things that people use to divide people. So some of the things that I came across other people using were things like sex, obviously with female and male, we see that. In India, especially, a lot of times girls are aborted at a much, much higher rate than men because it's considered better to have a son than a daughter. We see ageism, especially with things like elder abuse, and then again with elective abortion. Ethnicity, I mean, all you have to do is turn on TV to see people discriminating, preventing the human rights of people based on skin color, who their parents were. Parentage, this is an interesting one. There's a woman named Rebecca Kisling, and she's a pretty famous speaker. She's been on all the news channels, and her mom was raped. So Rebecca is the product of rape. Now, Rebecca's kind of on this national campaign to speak up about abortion in the cases of rape. Now, just so you guys know, pregnancies that result from rape and result in an abortion is less than 1%. If you take like rape, incest, and cases where abortion saves the life of the mother, we're talking about less than 2%, depending on who you talk to. So this tiny, tiny little sliver. But appropriately, Rebecca is on fire for this issue because she hears people say things like, oh, you should have been aborted. People actually say that kind of stuff to her. They will say, because of who your father is, you should have been aborted, which is neither compassionate to the woman who is violated in the most intimate way a person could be violated, or the child. It's especially ironic when we look back historically to like the olden days. Like a woman's identity was based on who her dad was, right? Or who her father was, which is kind of archaic and sexist. And we like to think we're a lot more evolved, but that's exactly what we're doing in that situation. The next example is sled, and I need a volunteer, preferably a big guy. Come on down.
Yeah.
All right, what's your name?
Adam.
Adam. All right, stand here, Adam. All right, if you guys heard me speak a couple months ago, you might have heard the idea of sled, so this is review. Now, I can't take credit for sled because a brilliant guy named Klusendorf is the one who made it famous. To write that down, right? Sled, S-L-E-D, and the right Klusendorf with a K. He has a YouTube video that explains it very well. Sled, Klusendorf. And it's my brother Nate's favorite argument. All right, so this is the idea of what are differences between us and unborn. So, Adam, right? Mm-hmm. All right, Adam, if you look at you and you look at me, are we the same size? No, right? I know, you're disappointed. You want to be my size, but you can't be. It's just how it is, genetics. All right, size. There's a difference in size. Now, does that mean that I'm allowed to kill him or vice versa? Does it mean I am more human than him? No. He's like, starting to get protective. He's like, no, don't you dare. How about L, level of development? You are more developed than little third graders. Now, does that mean Adam can go beat them up? No. He's not more human because he's more developed. It's a binary thing. Either you are or you're not. There's no in-between gray area. Okay? Next thing is environment. When Adam goes home, is he going to be less human than when he was here? No. So this idea that whether or not we're in the womb doesn't really change who we are. It changes where we are, but not what we are, right? If I go over to China, I'm still me. I'm not going to magically become tall and blonde. It's not how it works. All right, next, not that I want to be. The next is D. And so this is degree of dependency. Now, do you care if I call you out?
Sure.
Okay, you're in college?
Yep.
Okay, do your parents help pay for like your food and that kind of stuff still? No, you're independent. Do they pay for anything?
Nope.
So you are fully independent. All right, raise your hand if your parents help you out with stuff. I won't judge you. All right, you are theoretically more dependent than he is. An astronaut that's outside of the spacecraft is somewhat dependent. If we go over to the hospital, there's going to be people on ventilators. They are more dependent. Now, does that dependency make them less human? No, it doesn't remove any of their human rights. It doesn't mean we can abuse them or kill them or anything like that. Right? You can sit down. Actually, wait, because I like Doritos because of the commercial. I stole those from back there. All right. It was great. I didn't have to go shopping because I knew they were going to have them here. So these are some examples of ways where people like to say we're different from the unborn and therefore it's justified to end their life. But as you guys saw, those aren't necessarily good reasons. I think they can do better. Peter Singer is one of the most famous and outspoken abortion advocates. He's an atheist. And one thing that I'll say, I don't like most of what he says. I don't especially respect him, but intellectually, he's very honest. He's very consistent in his theories, in his principles, and things like that, and I do respect that. Now, as part of that, he believes that the criteria upon which we should base our human rights is, instead of like how old you are or where you live or anything like that, is two things. He says self-awareness and the ability to be rational. Now, initially, those sound like pretty good ones, right? But when we start to apply them, they get kind of cloudy. Because let's say we're near a college campus, we're on a college campus. Let's say a girl gets blackout drunk. Is she going to be self-aware in that moment? Does that mean anyone can do anything that she doesn't want to her? No, much less something like we're talking about with abortion. Little infants are not rational, okay? Just look at the stuff they do for like 5 minutes. They are not rational, okay? And sometimes they are similar to the drunk adult. I see the parallels. But those are his criteria. They say things like, oh, they have to be rational, they have to be self-aware. But when we start to use things like that, it doesn't work out either. So again, we have to go back to our humanness, because that is the one thing that we all have in the same amount. All right, in your program on the right side, on the inside, you should see a big text box, and it's this. So I'm going to take a drink, and I want you guys to read that to yourselves. This is a brilliant kind of summary of what I've been talking about by a guy named Josh Bram. He worked with some other guys, Jeff Wagner from Justice and Equal Rights Institute. They all worked together on this. So go ahead and read it. This is maybe a 30-second description or argument for being pro-life, and it's better than anything I could come up with. All right, so that is a great little description or argument for being pro-life. And if you guys look at it, anywhere in there does it say Jesus, Bible, Scripture, anything like that? Now, obviously, as a Christian, I think Scripture completely agrees with this. But again, this is an argument that you can share, and no one can say, oh, you just say that because you're Jewish, or because you're Christian, or because you're even Muslim. Because all three of those faith traditions have a historically pro-life view. All right, so if you guys are like me, during some of the things we've talked about, in the back of my head, I keep thinking, but what about the woman? What about the woman? Because I think sometimes people get kind of like baby tunnel vision, where they get so focused on the baby that they forget about the mom. And the truth is, I don't know any pro-life person who believes that the woman is just an incubator or something like that. I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone that really believes that. So how can we be pro-life and pro-woman? Because a lot of times in the media and stuff we hear that if you're pro-woman, you have to be pro-choice. And that if you're pro-life, you must be anti-woman. And I kind of just refuse to fit into those categories because they're not true. And a great place for us to see that is actually, this is kind of like a dirty little secret of feminism. If you go back to the original feminists, the suffragists, the ones who are working for the right to vote, they were basically unanimously pro-life, okay? Susan B. Anthony is who's pictured here. They had a really cool newspaper called The Revolution, and in it there's article after article of pro-life messages and pros and things like that. The first woman to run for president, the first woman to be a doctor, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all these famous feminists were solidly pro-life and pro-woman. They thought it was insanity that we should have to pick one or the other. That just seemed very unnatural to them, and I agree with them. For example, let's see. I have a bunch of their quotes, and I like all of them, so I won't read all of them to you. This one is from Maddie Brinkerhoff. She was a lecturer in the Midwest. She was a very famous feminist, and this was in The Revolution, and it was written about 1869. So here's what she said. When a man steals to satisfy hunger, we may safely conclude that there's something wrong in society. So when a woman destroys the life of her unborn child, it is evidence that either by education or circumstances, she has been greatly wronged. So something a lot of the feminists would talk about is what are the situations, what are the root causes that lead to this situation? How do we love the mom and love the child? And you see that now more with what are called new wave feminists. I do recommend you check out their website, follow them on Facebook. They're hilarious. They're a little crass, so if you're very sensitive, don't check them out. But if you're not, they're hilarious. They're very, very funny. This was one of their memes. When our liberation costs innocent lives, it's merely oppression redistributed, which I think is brilliant. I'm giving you some of you the chance to write it down. And they do love pink, so warning, you're going to see lots of pink and lots of black when you look at their stuff. It's hilarious. Okay, so moving on, what does this look like to be pro-life, pro-woman? The first thing is, like I said, I refuse to pick a side. A lot of times our society kind of seems to put the mom against the baby, as if they are enemies, which is so bizarre when you think about the most natural place for a baby is inside its mother. So the fact that we've gotten so crazy as society that we treat this baby like a parasite shows that we've kind of, lost it. So my recommendation is that we love them both. Every year there's a big march in DC. This was actually their motto this year, love them both. And that is generally what I've seen when people decide to take action and respond to this issue in real life. Now, those of you who are college students, when you guys look around at campus, do you guys see a lot of pregnant people? Why do you guys think that is? Because I'm not in college anymore. That was like 10 plus years ago. So why do you think that is?
That'd be crazy to want to have a kid and go to school at the same time.
Yep, you'd have to be crazy to want to go to school and have a kid at the same time, because being a student is a full-time job. Being a mom's a full-time job, right? Yep, the whole ramen thing, that's for a reason, right? Any other ideas? Yes?
I think just we're still young enough that people are going to look down on you.
Okay, so there's the whole social aspect to it. Your parents or your pastor or your classmates or whoever looking down on you, right? Especially if you have siblings. There's especially lots of pressure on people when they're the first one in their family to go to college. My mom runs a pregnancy center. I know she's had women that have come in and they're maybe the first one in their family to go to college. And maybe they've had to face discrimination and stereotypes on their way to getting to college. The last thing they want to do is prove right someone who said they couldn't make it to college, right? You can imagine the extreme pressure and why it'd be so natural for someone in that situation to be afraid and trying to find a way out. I think any of us would feel that way. So obviously, are there no pregnant students because no one's having sex? No. Is it because none of them are getting pregnant because they're using condoms and birth control and everything else? No. The truth is our college campuses are not friendly when it comes to college students. Now, I will say this for UWM. They do have some scholarships to help out single parents and pregnant people, and that is huge. I believe there's a daycare right on campus too. That is huge. That's amazing. I don't believe they have changing rooms or they have changing tables in the bathrooms yet, right? So there's stuff for you guys to work on if you go here. Last time I was at WLC, I don't think I saw those either. At WLC, Wisconsin Lutheran College, some of the students here are from there also. People still have sex. People still get pregnant. You never see them on campus. I don't think I saw a pregnant student on campus the whole time I was there. And I went 4.5 years. I even went there extra long, and I didn't see anyone pregnant. So we've got some work to do on our college campuses, because the truth is no woman should have to decide between her child and education, okay? If they feel like those are their only options, we have failed as a society, and it's gonna hurt us as a society. So we gotta work together and make a change. So we've started to talk a little bit about some of the reasons, some of the causes for abortion. Another part of that is the idea of coercion. The truth is a large percentage of women that have abortions do it because they were pressured. It might be a mom, it could be a dad, it could be the boyfriend. But a lot of the women that are getting abortions are not doing it because they're excited about the idea, okay? If you go to an abortion clinic, when they leave, you're not gonna see people skipping and going out to celebrate usually, okay? This isn't something where people get excited and they write home about it. So we have to ask yourself, what are the circumstances that are driving someone to do this? And I'm not gonna lie, there are some women that do it for horrible reasons. I wish I could say that every person who does it is torn up over it, but that's just not true. But the majority of the women do have a hard time with it, and they're not doing it lightly. So let's move forward to a lot of those women choosing life, which is true. A lot of women do choose life. They decide, you know what, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, but I'm just gonna go one day at a time, and I'm not gonna have an abortion. And sometimes that's the extreme action. Sometimes that's the person who's being brave and going out on their own. Because maybe everybody, including their boyfriend, is telling them to have an abortion. So some of the bravest people I've met are single parents. The truth is, when we talk about women, when we talk about empowerment, choosing life, that is empowering for women. That's a choice that they can live with, a choice their kids can live with, a choice that they can be proud of, and it's just a different result. Life is also best for the little girls. All right, some of the babies developing in the womb are female. If I'm pro-woman, I should be pro-women of all ages, right? Not just the ones who've been born. All right. Thank you for bearing with me in my voice. These are two women that actually visited a local pregnancy center. The woman on the left is Carol Lafayette. She is amazing. Actually, say a prayer for her. She's waiting on a kidney right now, so she's having a real hard time. But Carol is amazing. When Carol was younger, she was a single mom, and this was kind of before it was a normal thing to be a single mom. And she found herself pregnant, and the father of her child was her married boss. So you can imagine the stress that she's going through. Especially back then, women had less of a voice, and she, more than anyone, felt like she had no voice. There was no discussion. There was no what can we do. There was no talk about child support. The father of the baby said, we're going to take care of this. Next thing she knew, the two of them were flying out to the East Coast. And even though this was over 30 years ago, she still remembers so many details from the abortion. She remembers what was on the ceiling. She remembers the tiles. She remembers how many people were in the waiting room. She remembers when she was having the abortion done, the sound of the suction machine as it tore the baby apart. She remembers after it was done when the nurse said, this woman had twins. Okay, that haunts her to this day. Okay? She didn't feel like she had a voice. So a good 30 years later, she was still thinking about that day, thinking about that child who didn't make it. Now here's the good news. There's nothing we can do, and I'm Christian, so it's going to show in a second. There's nothing we can do that is so big or so bad that's outside God's love and forgiveness. Okay? And she needed to hear that. And sometimes the things that we're most ashamed of, we need to hear that multiple times, right? If you're like me, I need to hear that again and again sometimes. You're forgiven, it's okay. And that's how she was. She went through a special Bible study. There's lots of them available. And what she did is she sat down with a group, and they met about 13 different times, and they would talk to her and kind of take her on this road to healing. She was able to have closure. They did a little memorial for her two children. She named them. She has little plaques that has their birth date on it. And by birth date, you understand what I'm saying. She has these little plaques for them, and it helped her to move on so that now when you see her, there's that sparkle back in her eyes. She has joy. She's happy. She is finally free of that burden. And I'll tell you, in those programs, they don't tell you, the women, oh, it wasn't a baby, because that's not respectful either. They help them address what happened and then help them to move on. Now, that's kind of a downer story. So we're going to move on, even though it had a happy ending. So we're going to move on to Jessica. Jessica was also a mom. She had a couple kids. Her life was crazy, and she found herself pregnant. She looked at her situation, and she thought, I got to have an abortion. I'm not ready for another kid. My hands are full right now. This is crazy. I need to have an abortion. But she decided before she went through with it, she was going to talk to someone. She needed to get some more information about how does this work and things like that. She ended up going to a pregnancy center and meeting with a volunteer counselor, or client advocate, if you want to use the proper term. And they had a really long chat. The volunteer she met with was named Sharon, and Sharon did a great job of listening. For the first time, Jessica had the chance to talk about her fears, to talk about her situation, and to process what was going on. Because the truth was, it hadn't really sank in yet. And the truth is, once you're pregnant, you can't become unpregnant. That's not how it works. And so she needed the chance to learn, okay, what is really involved with an abortion? Can it affect me emotionally and psychologically? Are there women who suffer from depression afterwards? Is there a chance there could be some sort of physical risk? And so she was able to get all of that information. Now, never in that time did the counselor ever say, you have to do this or you can't do that. This was an opportunity for her to be in a safe place where for free, no insurance required, she could get information. Now, Jessica obviously decided that the best choice for her was to choose life, which is awesome because then a few months later she gave birth to Zaylin, who's right there. Now this day, when they took this picture, Zaylin wasn't feeling very well, so you can't see her legs because she slobbered everywhere on everything. Her poor mom, her leg was drenched. But I'll tell you, even despite that, that smile on Jessica's face says it all. Because the truth is, she looked at her situation, and she was a really good mom, and she said, I can't live without my kids. There's no way I could do this to this other kid. And she felt empowered. She left the center with a smile on her face with a plan of how she was going to do this. That's empowerment. That's being pro-woman and pro-life. And that's what we need more of. But we're all going to have to work together to make that happen. Now, hopefully, I'm not a man. But I know a lot of men who, when they talk about this, are told men shouldn't have a voice on this issue. Which I find extra ironic when you think about Roe v. Wade, which was a landmark decision that made abortion legal in the U.S. It was made by a bunch of old white guys. Okay? So the same people, they're like, you don't have a uterus, you can't talk about it, and like lifting up their shirts and yelling profanities, things like that sometimes. They are still praising this decision, so it's pretty ironic. To me, I'm easily amused. I think it's ironic. What I want you to do is, once again, I'm going to have you talk to some of the people around you and talk about whether you think men should have a voice. And here's the tricky part. I want you to come up with a reason why. All right, I can't wait any longer to hear your guys' answers. All right, who is willing to share their answer? And especially guys, I'm interested in what you guys come up with. So the burden of proof is on the person who's saying that men shouldn't be able to have a voice, right?
Yeah, there should be some sort of positive argument that they can give.
They should be able to prove it. And I've never heard anyone come up with a good argument for that. Any other answers? Yes. It's their child too, right? I hear they're getting closer, but last I heard you still needed a man and a woman to create a human being. And I'm half kidding because I did see a headline about how they might be getting really close to not needing men for that anymore. Sorry, guys. But theoretically, at this point, you still need a man. And actually, the DNA is half men. Something that frustrates me about this is, let's say a girl gets pregnant and carries the baby. What is one of the expectations of the father? It's even a legal requirement. Child support, right? So the guy doesn't have any say in that situation, right? Now, I will say, as a society, we've got to get better about this and tougher on this, because one of the pressures, I should say, for women to have an abortion is the idea that they're not going to get proper support from the father of the baby. So we need to get better about this. But yeah, we expect the guys to do child support, but before the baby's born, we don't give them a voice. There was a gentleman really, really big guy, built like a linebacker. And he went in for post-abortion counseling, not because he pressured his girlfriend to have an abortion, but because she did it without telling him, against his will. He was very excited to be a father. She decided she didn't want to go through with it, had an abortion while he was out of town, and it took years for him to work through that. He would cry and cry and cry because he kept thinking to himself, if I'd been a better man, if I'd been this, I'd been like that. So this guy had no voice in that situation. What about the idea that you have to have like a uterus to tell what's moral? That's a problem for me. I don't like this implication that like if you don't have a uterus, you can't say it's wrong. Because when do we do that with other things? Like I'm not married, but I can still say that spousal abuse is wrong, right? So it's kind of crazy. I came across a couple other reasons. Let's see. I wrote them down. Another reason is men are partially responsible for this abortion culture because there are a lot of guys who want to be able to have sex without any responsibility. And in those cases, it really benefits them. Same thing with rapists. It helps them that there's legalized abortion. We were all once in the womb, so it's little baby boys that are being aborted too. So guys definitely have a reason to speak up about that. And then finally, kind of the idea that when there is large-scale killing, as a society, we kind of decide that it's our business. It's kind of part of being a citizen in America, right? If there's a homicide, if there's a fire, if there's a terrorist attack, if there's a war, we're all talking about it regardless of whether it directly affects us, because there's this idea that we're kind of all in this together. The good thing is a lot of men are amazing voices on this issue. Lecrae is an example. He's a Christian rapper. It's Lecrae. If you've never heard of him, check him out. He is very open about his experiences and things like that, and he's a brilliant voice on this issue, so check him out. This is another gentleman. This is Walter Hoy, and he is obviously a man, and he's an amazing voice on this issue. And he's also a good voice on it because he's a pastor, which brings us to our final question, the final point, and that is, what does abortion have to do with the church? So here we go. All right, statistically, 4 in 10 women who've had abortions were going to church at the same time. Now, maybe you guys are more savvy than I am, but when I heard that, along with a lot of other pregnancy center people, we were shocked. I mean, I'd heard things that like the abortion rate was kind of similar between Christians and non-Christians, but we figured it was because like 75% of people in America say they're Christian, and most of them don't go to church. So then when CareNet, a national organization, did the study and found out 4 in 10 were attending church, that kind of made me sit up. And it also kind of broke my heart. In our churches, I think we're getting really good at having lots of programs, lots of supportive environments. We have support groups for those who are divorced. We have support groups for those who are struggling with an addiction to alcohol, right? But you never see, at least I've never seen, a church that has something to support with maybe a pregnancy decision, or maybe adoptive parents, or single parenthood. You don't see a lot of programs for that, and given statistically how high it is, I think we got some work to do. Also, like I mentioned, if we have that many women in our church who've had an abortion experience, there's probably a lot of people who are wounded, a lot of people who are hurt, and those people are our family. We need to help them. So that's something else, is post-abortion support groups. We gotta start talking about this issue, and we'll talk about that more in a second. Finally, call me crazy, I think church is supposed to be like a family. I was blessed to have that experience growing up where church was a family. Everybody hugged each other, which is awful if you weren't a people person. I am, so I loved it. But we were a family. If someone had surgery, the next day they were getting tons and tons of free food. The pastor didn't have to ask people to do it. It's just how family is. You take care of each other. And that's how the church should be. The last place a lot of girls want to go when they find out they're pregnant is to their church and their pastor. And why is that? Because it's not because they're crazy. I don't blame them. It'd probably be the last place I'd want to go to. Yes?
It's because they're afraid they're going to be told that what they did was wrong.
They're afraid they're going to be told what they did is wrong. What else? Yes?
Pastor probably can't relate the best to the situation, generally because you're a guy and
Yes, the pastor, sorry, I think that's funny because the seminarians are younger than me now, which my dad loves to remind me of, so that's funny. But yes, the pastor might have a hard time relating to this 18-year-old who just got pregnant and is a senior in high school and doesn't want to tell her parents. I've heard of girls who are youth leaders who maybe made a mistake with their fiance and were so terrified of the congregation finding out that they've had an abortion. And sometimes these girls regret it instantly. So again, most of these people, they're not doing it cavalierly, they're not doing it because they're selfish, they're genuinely scared. And if you think about it, picture your church if you go to one. If not, I can recommend some nice ones. But picture yourself going into church, and let's imagine it's a pretty close-knit church, people know who each other is, and all of a sudden somebody's daughter walks in with a baby and no wedding ring. Let's be honest. Are people going to look at her funny? Are people going to judge? Is there going to be some old lady in the back who's going to shake her head? She doesn't even have to say anything. She just shakes her head. I might have known a lady like that. She might have made me cry when I was a kid a lot. I have stories about that, but we won't go there. All right, so church is supposed to be family. Now, who likes Disney movies? Admit it. I heard there's a dating site for Disney fans. I think it's probably all girls, but who knows? I was trying to picture straight men that I know ever doing that, but maybe they want their princess. I don't know. Anyway, one of my favorite, it is relevant, sort of. One of my favorite Disney movies is actually Zilo and Stitch, because it actually drew women like you'd see in real life, which I thought was like amazing. They actually looked like people you know. And in it, they talk about this word, ohana, which means family. And in it, they say again and again, ohana means family, and family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. And that's how church is supposed to be. That's how campus ministry is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the place where you can go and share your garbage and get support and help feel forgiven. That's how it's supposed to be. That's what we got to work towards. All right. Now we talked a little bit about feminism, and that actually kind of meets with Christianity, with the idea that both of those philosophies, both of those approaches to life, say that if you have someone that's like vulnerable or maybe dependent, that we kind of have a duty to help them out. They should just get extra attention, extra support, extra love. And even as a society, we see that with things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. We know in the back of our head that people, whether it's a little child or a little animal, that they need extra care, right? It's just in how we were wired, I think. I think God put that in our hearts. And we actually see that when we go back to the early Christian church. During Roman times, the Romans were perfectly okay with people taking their children, if they were, I think it was less than 2 years old, and they would take the child and they'd abandon it out in the wilderness, which is horrific, infanticide. Now, what's amazing is the early Christian church started doing adoptions at that point. During the dark of night, they would rescue these children, and they would adopt them. So for those of us who are Christians, that's our heritage, okay? And if you look at it today, you see it. There's usually, last stat I heard was at least 2 million people who are eager to adopt. They don't care if the child has disabilities, if it's young, if it's old. There are people hungry for this opportunity, which also shows we got to start talking about adoption a little more, because it can be a great pro-woman, pro-life option. I also believe that Scripture is pretty clear when it comes to this issue. Can anyone give me an example of either a Bible verse or a story that kind of reinforces this pro-life view? Crickets, right? Show it. We're not going to call you out or embarrass you, Marta.
Sure.
All right, I see no Bible verses. From birth I was cast upon you, from my mother's womb you have been my God. Psalm 22:10. Yes. One of my favorite Bible verses is where in Proverbs it talks, I think it's Proverbs, you can check me out at Pastors, where it talks about speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves. And it talks about this idea that if we see evil and we don't do anything about it, God doesn't support that. God is not fond of that. And it talks about this idea that the God who is all-knowing knows that. He sees it when we watch kind of these crimes against humanity. In the Bible, it talks a lot about the unborn. We think about when Jesus and John the Baptist were in the same room. We think about all those Bible passages about being knit together in our mother's womb, things like that. It was actually the Bible was very ahead of science in that way, because this was long before ultrasounds and things like that. So it's pretty amazing. Which makes sense when you think about this story. Some of you might have heard this story, but if you had, it's a good story, so you'll be okay with it. During the time of the Holocaust, a lot of the Jews were transported via train. And there was one German church in particular that backed up to a train track. And so a lot of times the train would be running during the church services. And for example, one Sunday, the church was going by and it was very, very noisy. You could hear, sitting in the pew, lots of Jews and people going to death camps pounding on the side of the train. You could hear screams. You could hear people crying for help. Now, in that moment, historically, the pastor told everyone to sing a hymn and just kept telling them to sing louder and louder and louder to the point where they could hopefully drown out the sound. And actually, they weren't able to. A man who was part of that congregation has since come forward and kind of shared his story. I don't know if he's around anymore. But to this day, he still feels guilty over that. Because even though he was just a boy when that happened, in the back of their head, they knew better. I think in our hearts, we have this sense that we all are equal, that our humanness, the fact that we are created by Christ kind of makes us all the same, and that in the back of our head, there's this kind of sense that we're supposed to help each other out, that we're supposed to look out for each other. And what that congregation was doing was they were seeing how much they could drown out what was happening literally in their backyard. And I think it can be kind of easy for us to look at the people during that time, or people during the civil rights movement, especially during the African slave trade with the US. When we look at that, we think, how could these people do this? How could these Christians be part of it? But I'm not sure we're that much better than them when it comes to issues like abortion. Because the truth is, it's over 1 million babies that are aborted each year. Okay? In the Holocaust, I think it was about 11 million, and I think about 6 million of that were Jews. And that in itself is an atrocity. I think it's an affront to God, and I think it's a violation of who we are as people. But to think about abortion as being like 5 times as many people, and that's in the US, where most of us are pretty proud to be American, and we should be, that's shocking, that's staggering. The fact that 2 minutes from here, there's an abortion clinic that literally ends the lives of thousands of babies every year, and there's no moment of silence. There is no news story. It's not a headline. It's just the status quo. So in that way, I think we are kind of similar to a lot of the people that were growing up there. And I'm not saying this to judge them. I'm just saying we definitely have some stuff to work on ourselves. Now, again, the cool thing is I think the side of life is winning. And you can see that all kinds of different places. You guys are called the pro-life generation. Actually, since I want to say the 90s, less and less people, especially teenagers, have been in favor of abortion. Let's see, what's the stat? There was a Gallup poll done in the early 2000s, and it said that well over 70% of teens thought abortion was morally wrong. There's other ones that showed, let's see, there was a study done of American college freshmen back in like the early 90s, and it showed that ever since, or it was done more recently, it showed that ever since the early 1990s, the abortion rate has been, their support for abortion has been dropping, okay? The truth is, compared to your parents and your grandparents, you guys are the most pro-life, okay? More people are saying, you know what, women deserve better than this. The unborn deserve better than this. And the church is starting to come together and really make a difference. And the cool thing is you guys can do it on your campuses. There's a million different ways you can do it. You can get involved with the pro-life groups. You can be supportive of any pregnant students you know. You can work on campus to make it more supportive of people who find themselves pregnant. You can volunteer at pregnancy centers. You can volunteer with pro-life groups. There's a lot of different things that you guys can do where we can actually work towards this goal of more equality for everybody. And the cool thing is, if you are involved with it, and let's say you help a woman choose life, that impact is going to go on for generations if you think about it. Because her child might have a child, might have a child, might have a child. And so the impact you have is kind of like that ripple effect where it could be huge. And the cool thing is you don't need a cape. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a doctor or anything like that. There aren't these prerequisites. You don't have to wait till you're grown up or you're old to do it. Like, we can start doing it right now. And I have lots of ways you can do that, so you can always talk to me if you want ideas for how.
Let's give Rachel a round of applause.